Hey, what's up guys? Today, I'll show you an action thriller film, Venom, Part 2, Let There Be Carnage. Spoiler ahead, watch out and take care. The movie begins in 1996 with two young lovers, Cletus and Francis, living at a reform school in California. Their rooms are directly above each other, and they use a pipe to communicate with one another. Since Frances' ultrasonic power grows stronger, the school sends her to a top-secret institute to lock her powers forever. From the window, Cletus angrily watches as the police drag Frances into a van, guarded by a detective. During the trip, Frances shouts loud enough to damage Detective's left ear. The van falls sideward when Frances tries to grab the gun from Detective, but he shoots her first to stop her escape. The bullet's impact knocks Frances onto the street, and Detective thinks she's dead. However, Frances wakes up the next day, but is locked up in a thick glass cage, placed inside a soundproof room, which is strong enough to withstand her power. The psychiatrist welcomes her arrival and introduces the institution as her new home. 25 years later, Frances reads the newspapers delivered by the psychiatrist, which states that Cletus will be convicted of death once the FBI locates the missing bodies of the people he murdered. Meanwhile, Detective summons Eddie to the police station to tackle Cletus' special request to see him. Detective reckons Cletus might reveal the location of the missing buried bodies he murdered if Eddie visits him, but Eddie's reluctant to accept the invitation. Detective expects Eddie to do the right thing, and then leaves him behind to consider the invite. Suddenly, Venom sprouts behind Eddie, trying to bite off Detective's head, but Eddie quickly drags Venom into the bathroom. Eddie asks Venom to respect his occupation, and yet Venom only wants to provoke Eddie again, who fears this opportunity would blow up in his face again, just like last time with Anne. In the end, Eddie accepts the chance to interview Cletus in the prison. The next day, Eddie meets Cletus in his cage, demanding why he wants to see him. Cletus knows his story sells, so he wants Eddie to publish his little poem first, in exchange for his exclusive story told by himself. Eddie bites the offer and writes the message that Cletus wants to share. Eddie then asks whom the message is for, and Cletus simply answers to follow his request. Eddie is about to leave until Venom stops him to look at the carvings in Cletus' bedroom. The room shows a cathedral, writings on a tree trunk, and a beach with crosses. Afterward, Eddie meets Detective outside the station to fill him the scoop he learned from Cletus. However, Detective thinks Eddie is joking after hearing Cletus only gave a poem. Nevertheless, Eddie answers he needs more time to deal with Cletus before they actually obtain useful information. At night, Eddie goes home, and Venom deciphers the carvings in Cletus' cell room. Venom first draws on each paper the cathedral, the tree beside a house, and a beach with crosses on the corner. Next, he types Rodeo Beach on the search bar, and the beach image matches perfectly with Venom's imitation of Cletus' beach carving. The following day, Eddie pinpoints the missing buried bodies at Rodeo Beach to the police. After decades of searching by the police and FBI, Eddie solved the case overnight. Moreover, his contribution to solving the old case put him back on the pedestal again. However, his achievement only angers Detective for stealing his work and inflicts pain on Frances and Cletus because the government just reinstated the death penalty for Cletus. One night, Venom admits he wishes Eddie to be a detective who solves crimes while he eats the bad guys. However, he knows it's impossible because Eddie forbids him, especially now they're under surveillance by the FBI. If ever Venom eats humans, they'd be sent to Area 51 and get killed. However, Venom needs to eat human brains to survive, but Eddie only allows him to consume chickens and chocolate, since they also contain phenylethylamine, primarily found in human brains. Venom nags Eddie to eat outside, so Eddie brings him to Mrs. Chen's store to buy chocolates. But when they find out they're out of stock, Venom resorts to eating chickens. Venom then takes a stroll on the roofs until he catches a thief stealing from a woman. Venom immediately rescues the woman just to eat the thief's head, but as usual, Eddie stops him again. While Venom is jumping onto roofs, Eddie receives a call from Anne, and Eddie reverts back to his body. Venom leaves him hanging on the edge of a building while Eddie answers the call. Anne invites Eddie tomorrow night to meet up to announce the exciting news. Venom thinks Anne and Dr. Dan have broken up, and it's time for Eddie to rekindle his hormone ship with Anne, Eddie's ex-girlfriend. The following night, Eddie meets Anne to hear the news. Anne flashes her engagement ring to Eddie, and Venom gives a disagreeing grunt in Eddie's head. Unfortunately, there's no getting back together, but just an upcoming wedding from Anne and Dr. Dan. Eddie pretends to be happy, but it's apparent he's still hurt. Anne also knows Venom is alive in spite of Eddie's lying and advises Venom to take care of Eddie. Once again, Eddie bids his congratulations to Anne and then takes off on the road, so Anne wouldn't see his sadness. Eddie travels home while it's pouring outside, and Venom can feel Eddie's heartache. Venom pities Eddie because he can only heal physical pain and not emotional ones. Moreover, Venom comforts Eddie to just accept and move on in life. However, Eddie disagrees because it's easy for Venom to say things that he can never personally experience. Regardless, Venom lets his harsh comment slide since they're both hurting at the moment. The next day, Venom cheers up Eddie through cooking a meal for him, singing a song, and retrieving his mail letters for him. Among the mails is an invitation from Cletus to Eddie. He wrote his letter in a creative way on a postcard. He invites Eddie first to watch his death, since he's responsible for ending his life soon. Second, he mentions he was revived at birth, then listed down how he murdered his mother and grandmother, and was later sent to the reform school by his father. Unfortunately, he also got bullied at school, but it was also the time he met Francis, who saved him from bullies and gave him hope. Eddie then decides to visit Cletus in his cell before his death. During the visit, Eddie sees Cletus eating his last meal. He proceeds to record their conversation purposely for work. However, Cletus intentionally provokes Eddie, but it's Venom who got affected by Cletus's harshness. Venom attacks Cletus, but Cletus quickly bites Eddie's hand so hard it bleeds. An officer intervenes and separates them both, and Cletus comments Eddie's blood tastes different than usual. Afterward, he licks off Eddie's blood resting on his finger. In the evening, Eddie goes home, but he's mad at Venom for ruining the conversation with Cletus. Soon, they start to blame each other for their mistakes and regrets in life. The two friends argue while wrestling their muscles until Venom decides to unbind himself from Eddie. Venom transfers to a random guy and then destroys Eddie's beautiful motorcycle. Afterward, he jumps to another body and leaves Eddie for good. At night, Cletus is about to face his death in front of the families whom he murdered. The clock strikes 9, and the warden slowly injects the poison to kill him, but something bizarre occurs. A red liquid texture excretes from Cletus to the syringes to stop the poison from entering his body. Soon, Cletus transforms into a full armor of a new symbiote born from Venom's blood, named Carnage. Carnage has tentacles and is colored red, since he's a mixture of Eddie's blood and Venom. Carnage wreaks havoc in the prison, killing all the officers and the warden, and then breaking all the prisoners out of their cell. Afterward, Cletus escapes prison like nothing happened. The following day, Eddie repairs his wrecked apartment for the whole day caused by their fight. He rests at home and watches the news, but then he learns Cletus broke out of prison and is declared missing. Just then, Detective visits Eddie because he thought Cletus would try to visit the man who nearly got him executed. He also wants to know if Eddie contributed to Cletus' escape, but Eddie denies it firmly. Afterward, he reminds Eddie to update him with any information about where Cletus might go. When Detective leaves, Eddie initiates to investigate himself, where he listens to his recorded conversation with Cletus while looking back at Venom's drawings. Unfortunately, Eddie is vexed with the new case because he's used to Venom solving them for him. On the other hand, Venom enjoys his free hormone time outside the world. He attends a party and gives speeches, but he still misses Eddie despite the freedom on his hands. Meanwhile, Cletus eats a random person's head and steals a convertible Mustang. Carnage revs the car, so Cletus can travel on the road. Afterward, Cletus and Carnage agree on a deal that Carnage must help Cletus first to search for his lover, Francis, before they kill Venom and Eddie. Back at Eddie, he arrives at the reform school, where he finds engraved initials of Cletus and Francis on a large tree trunk. Eddie calls Detective to inform him of an important clue. Eddie reasons that Cletus wants to get married to Francis, and it now makes sense after he discovers the initials on the tree. But Detective freezes in place because he believes Francis is gone after he shot her years ago. Meanwhile, Cletus enters a convenience store, attacks the registrar, and lets Carnage search for Francis' possible location on the internet. Soon, Cletus learns Francis is alive and is locked up in a top-secret institute. The psychiatrist in the said institute is confident that Cletus won't locate Francis. However, she falls short when she sees Cletus inside Francis' cage. Cletus grabs the psychiatrist and strangles her to death. Cletus introduces Carnage, who helps Cletus to liberate Francis from her glass cage. When the two lovers reunite once again, Carnage does the job of attacking the employees and breaking them out of the room. Cletus stole Mustang because it's Francis' favorite car. Just then, authorities quickly arrive to pursue the two criminals on the loose, but they struggle to contain them because of Carnage's formidable strength. A chopper arrives on the scene, and Francis shrieks at the chopper to bring it down. However, Carnage loses his grip and reverts back to Cletus because he's sensitive to sounds. Afterward, Carnage reasserts himself again and attacks the second chopper in the sky. Meanwhile, Venom crashes into Mrs. Chen's store, asking for food. At first, she doesn't recognize him until Venom emerges from the random guy's body and crawls toward her. Back at the Institute, Detective learns Cletus and Francis have escaped together, so he puts out an APB to Cletus' car and summons Eddie to the precinct. Soon, Detective interrogates Eddie in a private room. He suspects that Eddie is the reason why something bad happens, like the multiple dead bodies around his apartment, the outburst at the lobster restaurant last year, and he was the only person alive after the rocket explosion in Life Foundation. Moreover, Detective mentions that wherever Cletus goes, there's this monster riding along his dangerous scheme. Just then, Eddie grunts as he realizes Cletus obtained a symbiote too after he bit him in the prison. However, Eddie doesn't answer questions until he makes a phone call to his lawyer, Anne. Dr. Dan accompanies Anne to the precinct, and then she privately speaks with Eddie in the interrogation room. Eddie explains to Anne that he can't tell the truth to the cops, especially if they find out the serial killer they're chasing has a symbiote inside him. When Anne asks for Venom, Eddie whispers that Venom left his body after he got tired of living off of chickens and chocolates alone. While Eddie is detained in the precinct, Anne offers to search for Venom. Afterward, Anne visits Mrs. Chen and her store to look for Venom. Soon, she realizes Venom is inside Mrs. Chen. Venom wants to stay behind because he doesn't want to help Eddie fix his mess, but he eventually agrees to help when Anne showers him with compliments. Anne returns with Venom to meet Eddie in the interrogation room, where Venom reveals himself to Eddie. Venom breaks Eddie out of the precinct and brings Eddie to Dr. Dan's car, parked in an alley road. Eddie wants to reclaim Venom, but Venom doesn't want to leave Anne's body unless he apologizes to him. Eddie struggles to find the words because he knows Venom is right when he's the reason why he's thriving in life again. Eventually, Eddie apologizes in the end and admits he's special because of Venom. Venom finally accepts Eddie's apology and they reunite once again. Afterward, Eddie tells Anne and Dan to seek a safe place and away from the city. Meanwhile, Cletus, Francis, and Carnage set the reform school to fire as part of their revenge plot. Afterward, Francis and Cletus split up to invite the people who wronged them to their red wedding at Grace Cathedral. While Cletus kidnaps Detective on the street, Francis kidnaps Anne and leaves behind Dr. Dan to send a message to Eddie to show up at the wedding if they still want Anne to live. The battle takes place in the cathedral, where Cletus and Francis get married. Cletus then recites the poem as his vow, but Venom crashes into the wedding as expected. But he suddenly chickens out upon seeing Carnage is hued red because it means he's much stronger than him. Eddie then convinces Venom to defeat Cletus in exchange for his freedom to eat bad and baldy guys. Venom agrees to the condition and reasserts himself back on quickly. Just then, Francis shrieks at Venom, but her sonic power also affects Carnage, so he slaps Francis' smelly mouth away because she's too loud. To separate the fight, Carnage orders Francis to deal with Detective on the roof while he fights with Venom. Soon, Venom and Carnage brutally fight one another. But when Carnage consumes the priest to boost himself up, he grows twice bigger than Venom. Fortunately, Dr. Dan shows up on the ceiling beam to pour a burning gas onto Carnage to weaken him. Suddenly, the bell chimes, which causes the symbiotes to quiver and return to their host bodies. Since the two symbiotes can't emerge fully, Eddie and Cletus fight man to man. While Cletus beats up Eddie, he admits that he's mad at him for only publishing one side of his story in public. Eddie forgot to mention how Cletus was just a scared and neglected little boy who had no one to save him, so he resorted to killing his abusive family alone, just to end the root cause of his misery. Carnage then takes over so he can kill Anne. When Carnage breaks open the ceiling to bring Anne to the roof, the debris drops onto Venom, trapping him completely. Dr. Dan tells Venom to save Anne, but Venom admits they can't defeat Carnage. At the roof, Francis stops Cletus from murdering Anne, but her annoying interference provokes Carnage to strangle her too. Cletus then tries to break free from Carnage to rescue Francis. The difference between Carnage and Venom is that Venom gets along with Eddie, whereas Carnage defies Cletus. Venom suddenly feels motivated and then liberates himself from the debris while shouting, "Little Protector." The movie ends with Venom rescuing Anne from Carnage's grasp, but Carnage skewers Venom and pitches him onto the roof. Anne hangs on dearly to Venom, who slowly rappels her until she reaches Dr. Dan on the floor, while he's enduring Carnage's continuous piercings. Venom then hints to Francis that they need sound, but when she's about to scream, Carnage pushes her off the edge. While falling, Francis screams loud enough to crumble the ceiling and weaken both Carnage and Venom. The bell drops from its bearing and crashes onto Francis. Meanwhile, Eddie and Cletus regain their bodies, but they drop from the sky since they're not armored by the symbiotes. Dan and Anne form a human tower on the floor so Venom can travel through them quickly in order to reach the ground and catch Eddie midair. Afterward, Venom eats both Carnage and Cletus, as promised and permitted by Eddie. In the end, Eddie bids goodbye to Ann and Dan, now that he's declared a fugitive of the state. Meanwhile, Detective's eyes glow blue, which insinuates that he'd obtained a part of Carnage. Venom and Eddie decide to stay together and seek refuge at a beach to hide from authorities. They also agreed that their new alias is now Legal Protector. This Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.